I stared at my computer screen, reading the email again. A calendar invite for an HR transition review had just landed in my inbox. The sender was Greg Halpern, my manager. My stomach dropped when I saw the attendee list. Greg, Mara from leadership, and HR. My name wasn't listed as the project lead anymore. This couldn't be right. I hadn't even submitted the final delivery files for our $10.2 million contract with Fortis Defense yet. The project I just spent 3 weeks rescuing from complete disaster. The project that would have cost Orexon Technologies everything if I hadn't stepped in. I picked up my phone and called HR directly. Hi, this is Dana Whitlow. I got a meeting invite, but I think there's been a mistake. No mistake, Dana, came the careful reply. Your position is being reevaluated. Greg submitted the paperwork yesterday. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Reevaluated? After I'd just saved a $10 million deal? I hung up, hands shaking. In all my years at Orexon, I'd never felt this betrayed. This couldn't be happening. 24 hours earlier, everything had been different. I was sitting at my desk, finalizing project documentation, when Micah knocked on my door. The young intern looked pale and nervous, clutching a coffee cup like his life depended on it. Dana, I need to tell you something, he whispered, glancing around. I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but I can't keep quiet. I gestured for him to sit down. Micah had been assigned to Greg, but always found excuses to help with my projects. He was smart, eager, and one of the few people who actually cared about doing good work. I overheard Greg and Mara on a Teams call, he continued, his voice barely audible. They were planning to fire you the second this project closes. Greg said you saved the deal, but you're too disruptive to the power balance. Those were his exact words. My blood ran cold. What else did they say? He's already submitted an internal credit memo. Him and Mara are listed as strategic leads. Your name isn't in it at all. Micah leaned forward. They think you won't see it coming because you already handed off the success. I sat there, stunned into silence. Then I looked at this brave kid who'd risked his internship to warn me. You did the right thing. Don't worry. I've got this. I didn't have time to go through proper channels. HR was clearly in on it. The executives would take Greg's side. They always did. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I had the client's respect. With steady hands, I dialed Ellis Kessler, lead compliance officer at Fortis Defense. Ellis had been on 2 late-night emergency calls with me during the project rescue. He knew exactly who had saved this deal. Ellis, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I need to be transparent, I said when he answered. I've been informed I may be removed from Orexon. I've seen a draft of the executive debrief you're scheduled to receive, and I believe it contains serious misrepresentation. There was a pause. I could hear him thinking. I'm not calling to fight or make accusations, I continued. I just want to make sure your compliance team gets the original communications logs, meeting notes, and final QA reviews I personally filed, in case you're relying solely on Orexon's version of who managed the rescue effort. Another pause. Then Ellis spoke, his voice serious. Thank you for your integrity, Dana. We'll be reviewing that information very carefully. I hung up, knowing I'd just changed everything with one simple, honest call. I sat alone in my office, looking at the stack of documentation I'd compiled over the past month. Every late night, every emergency call, every small victory was recorded there. This wasn't the first time I'd been the fixer who got pushed aside after solving everyone's problems. But it was definitely the worst. At 38, I'd spent my entire career being the person others called when things went wrong. I was calm under pressure, detail-oriented, and actually cared about delivering quality work. But those same qualities made me a threat to managers who preferred politics over performance. I thought about my team, the engineers who hadn't slept in days, the vendors who'd worked overtime, the client who'd trusted us to deliver. They all deserved better than this corporate backstabbing. But mostly, I thought about Greg's arrogance. He really believed he could steal credit for my work and get away with it. He had no idea that respect from clients couldn't be faked or transferred. You had to earn it, one honest conversation at a time. I gathered my files and locked them in my desk. Tomorrow would bring consequences. I just had to wait and see who would face them. 2 months earlier, everything had been falling apart. I remember walking into the conference room and seeing panic in everyone's eyes. Our $10.2 million AI integration project with Fortis Defense was spiraling toward disaster. Missed deadlines, failed test runs, and the very real threat of legal penalties hung over us like a storm cloud. Greg stood at the front of the room, his usual confident smile looking forced. "We're experiencing some minor setbacks," he told the assembled team. "Nothing we can't handle with better coordination." But I'd seen the real numbers. The project was 6 weeks behind schedule, with a hard deadline just 3 weeks away. The AI system integration wasn't working. The data stream validation kept failing, and our client was starting to ask very pointed questions about our competency. While Greg was busy attending golf meetings and preparing optimistic quarterly reports, his engineers were pulling all-nighters trying to fix fundamental problems in the code. The junior developers looked exhausted and defeated. I watched Greg dismiss everyone with vague promises about increased support. As the room emptied, I stayed behind, studying the project timeline on the whiteboard. The math was simple and terrifying. At our current pace, we wouldn't deliver even a basic working prototype, let alone a fully functional system. This was going to be a disaster that would destroy careers and cost the company millions. Greg cornered me after the meeting, his confident facade finally cracking. "Dana, I need your help," he said, closing his office door. "This project is in trouble. Real trouble." I'd been waiting for this moment. Greg had spent months dismissing my concerns and sidelining my suggestions. Now, with disaster looming, he was ready to listen. "You want me to take over the recovery?" I said. It wasn't a question. "Temporarily," he said quickly. "Just to get us back on track. You're good at this crisis management stuff." I looked at him carefully. Greg was desperate, but he was also calculating. He needed someone to save his project, but he'd want to take credit once the danger passed. "If I do this, I manage the recovery my way," I said. "No interference, no micromanaging, no redirecting my communications. Full authority to make the decisions needed to save this contract." Greg nodded eagerly. "Of course, you'll own the win." I should have gotten that in writing. Instead, I shook his hand and replied, "Of course I will." Looking back, I realized Greg had already planned to rewrite history. He just needed someone capable enough to create a success story he could steal. I spent my first day doing a complete audit of the project. What I found was worse than I'd expected. The AI integration had fundamental architecture problems. 3 different vendors were working on incompatible systems. The timeline was pure fantasy, and the budget was already blown. But I also found something else: talented people who'd been ignored and sidelined. Marcus, a senior systems engineer with 30 years of experience, had written detailed memos about the architecture problems months ago. Sarah, a procurement analyst, had identified vendor issues early but was told to stay in her lane. I called them both into my makeshift war room. "I need your honest assessment," I told them. "No politics, no sugarcoating. Can we save this?" Marcus spread out his technical diagrams. "If we cut the redundant vendor contracts, rebuild the core integration, and work around the clock, maybe. But it'll take complete focus and zero interference." Sarah pulled up her vendor analysis. "I can renegotiate 3 critical contracts if you give me authority to act. But some people won't like the decisions I'll have to make." "Let me worry about the politics," I said. "You two worry about the technical solutions." For the first time in weeks, I saw hope in their eyes. These were the people who actually understood the work. I just had to give them the support they needed. 3 days into the recovery, Greg started interfering. I'd send critical updates to the client, and Greg would follow up with his own context emails. I'd schedule vendor calls, and Greg would insist on joining to provide executive oversight. The confusion was immediate. A key vendor called me directly, sounding frustrated. "Dana, I thought Greg was the point of contact. He's asking for different deliverables than what you requested." I took a deep breath, realizing Greg was already positioning himself as the real project leader. "I'm handling the technical recovery," I explained. "Greg is managing the executive communications." But internally, I started documenting everything. Every email, every decision, every conversation got recorded and timestamped. If Greg wanted to play politics, I'd play with facts. That afternoon, Greg called a leadership sync meeting without inviting me. I found out about it when Marcus mentioned Greg had given him conflicting instructions about the integration timeline. I walked straight to Greg's office. "We need to clarify roles," I said. "You're handling the technical recovery," he replied smoothly. "I'm maintaining client relations and strategic oversight." Translation: I was doing the work while he was controlling the narrative. I smiled and nodded, but inside I was taking notes. Greg was already preparing to erase me from the success story. I converted an unused conference room into our war room. Whiteboards covered every wall with technical diagrams, vendor timelines, and QA checklists. I instituted daily stand-ups at 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., with rotating shifts to maintain 24-hour coverage. The transformation was immediate. Engineers who'd been frustrated and directionless suddenly had clear objectives and decision-making authority. Marcus coordinated the integration fixes, while Sarah renegotiated vendor contracts in real time. Micah volunteered to work extra hours, helping track deliverables and maintain communication logs. He was eager to learn and genuinely cared about quality work. "This is how projects should always run," he told me one evening as we updated the status boards. The war room became a symbol of focused energy. People started referring to it as Dana's command center. And team members would stop by just to see the progress visualized on our boards. But I noticed Greg never visited. He'd send other people to check on the situation or request updates through formal channels. He was maintaining careful distance from the actual work, positioning himself to take credit while avoiding responsibility for the methods. I didn't mind. Let him stay in his office while we saved his contract. The engineers knew who was really leading this recovery. With 1 week left before delivery, we hit a critical bug in the AI core system. The pattern recognition algorithm was producing false positives that would make the entire system unreliable. In military applications, unreliable data could be catastrophic. I gathered Marcus and the 2 junior developers in the war room at 11 p.m. "How bad is this?" I asked. "Bad," Marcus said grimly. "We need to rebuild the core logic from scratch. Even working non-stop, it's at least 48 hours of coding." I looked at the exhausted faces around me. These people had already given everything. "I'll stay with you," I said. "We'll work in shifts." What followed was the longest 2 days of my career. I coordinated with vendors, managed client communications, and even did some basic coding myself. By Thursday at 4:47 a.m., we had a working solution. The junior developer, a kid named Jamie, actually started crying when the final test passed. "We did it," he whispered. That morning, I submitted the fix to Fortis Defense for final QA approval. By Friday afternoon, Ellis called personally to confirm their sign-off. The $10.2 million contract was saved. But Greg's reaction was strange. Instead of celebration or relief, he became quiet and distant. I should have recognized the warning signs. The week after Fortis approved our delivery, the atmosphere at Orexon shifted. Greg stopped copying me on important emails. HR quit, including me in promotion discussions. One of my best analysts was suddenly reassigned to another department for budget reasons. Small things, but together they painted a clear picture. I was being systematically isolated and sidelined. During team meetings, Greg would thank everyone for the project's success without mentioning specific contributions. When executives asked about the recovery process, Greg would speak in vague terms about leadership decisions and strategic pivots. I watched him carefully rewrite the narrative, transforming a desperate crisis recovery into a planned strategic initiative. The engineers knew the truth, but engineers don't set company policy. Micah started looking nervous whenever he saw me, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Other team members gave me sympathetic looks when Greg wasn't around. The final warning sign came when my security access to certain project files was quietly revoked. When I asked about it, I was told it was routine access cleanup after project completion. I realized Greg wasn't just taking credit for my work. He was erasing evidence that I'd done it at all. Micah finally worked up the courage to tell me everything. He knocked on my door, looking terrified but determined. "I heard the whole conversation this time," he said, glancing around nervously. "Greg was on a video call with Mara yesterday. They were laughing about how you saved their asses, but were too disruptive to the power balance to keep around." My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my voice steady. What exactly did they say? Greg said you're a threat because you actually know how to do the work. He said the engineers listen to you more than him, and that makes him look weak. Mara agreed that you needed to go before you became a leadership problem. Micah pulled out his phone and showed me a photo he'd taken of his computer screen. It was Greg's internal memo to the executive team, titled Project Icarus Recovery, Strategic Leadership Analysis. I scanned the document quickly. Greg and Mara were listed as strategic recovery leads. My name appeared once, buried in a paragraph about technical support coordination. They think you won't fight it because you're too professional, Micah said. Greg told Mara you'd probably just quietly accept it and move on. I looked at this brave kid who was risking his career to warn me. Thank you, Micah. This changes everything. That night, I sat in my apartment and let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal. I'd poured everything into saving that project. Sleepless nights, missed dinners, constant stress. I'd salvaged Greg's reputation and saved everyone's jobs, and this was my reward. Erasure and dismissal. For a moment I considered just walking away. Finding another job, starting over somewhere else. It would be easier than fighting a battle I might not win. But then I thought about Micah, risking his internship to do the right thing. I thought about Marcus and Sarah, who'd trusted me to lead them through the crisis. I thought about all the talented people who'd been passed over while incompetent managers climbed the ladder. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about whether merit and honesty meant anything in corporate America. I opened my laptop and began organizing my documentation. Every email, every time-stamped log entry, every piece of evidence that showed what really happened during the project recovery. Greg had made one critical mistake. He assumed I'd go quietly. He had no idea that quiet people can be the most dangerous opponents when they finally decide to fight back. I wasn't going to fight dirty. I was going to fight with the truth. I spent the weekend analyzing my options like a chess game. Going to HR was pointless. They'd already shown their loyalty. Appealing to executives would be my word against Greg's, and he had political connections I lacked. But I had something Greg didn't have. I had the client's respect and trust. Ellis Kessler at Fortis Defense knew exactly who had saved that project. He'd been on emergency calls with me at midnight. He'd seen my technical knowledge and problem-solving skills firsthand. Most importantly, he valued integrity over politics. I reviewed every communication I had with Fortis during the recovery. Professional, detailed, and well-documented. Then I looked at Greg's communications. Vague, superficial, and clearly written by someone who didn't understand the technical details. The contrast was obvious to anyone paying attention. I didn't need to make accusations or start drama. I just needed to ensure Fortis had access to the complete record when they evaluated future contracts with Orexon. The beauty of this approach was its simplicity. I wasn't attacking Greg directly. I was just making sure the client had all the facts they needed to make informed decisions. Greg had built his strategy on hiding the truth. I was going to win by revealing it. I compiled a comprehensive documentation package, not to attack Greg, but to provide Fortis with a complete project record. Communication logs showing who had actually managed vendor relationships. Technical documents proving who had architected the recovery solutions. Time-stamped meeting notes demonstrating who had led the crisis response. Everything was professional, factual, and verifiable. No emotional language, no personal attacks, just clear evidence of what had happened and who had done what. I organized it all into a clean, searchable digital package that would make any compliance officer's job easier. If Fortis wanted to verify Orexon's claims about project leadership, they'd have everything they needed. The package told a simple story. When the project was failing under Greg's leadership, I had taken over the recovery effort. When critical decisions needed to be made, I had made them. When vendors needed technical guidance, I had provided it. I wasn't trying to make Greg look bad. I was just ensuring the truth was available to anyone who wanted to verify it. That evening, I encrypted the package and prepared to send it to Ellis. Not as an attack on my company, but as a professional courtesy to a client who deserved accurate information. This was how you won without shouting, with preparation, documentation, and unshakable facts. Delivery day arrived, with Greg strutting around the office like he'd personally conquered enemy territory. He wore his best suit and kept checking his reflection in windows. The final project files had been submitted to Fortis, and Greg was already planning his victory lap. I watched from my desk as he held court in the conference room, describing to anyone who'd listen how his strategic leadership approach had turned the project around. He used phrases like innovative crisis management and executive-level decision-making without any apparent shame. Mara stopped by to congratulate him on the successful recovery, and they shared knowing smiles about their brilliant strategy. Neither of them acknowledged my presence, even though I was sitting 20 feet away. Then my computer pinged with an encrypted email from Fortis Compliance, requesting clarification package on executive oversight of Project Icarus delivery, including recovery management documentation, recovery communications, and all team assignments during the final 30-day window. I read it twice, keeping my expression neutral. Greg was still holding court, completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. I forwarded the email to him with a simple note, FYI, client follow-up request. His response came back immediately, standard formality, nothing to worry about. If only he knew. The next morning, Ellis joined a live video call with Orexon's leadership team. I wasn't invited, but I could see the conference room from my desk. Greg, Mara, and 3 executives sat around the table looking confident and relaxed. Before we discuss future contracts, Ellis said through the speakers, I'd like Greg to walk us through the API patchwork timeline and explain how he implemented the interdependency rollback. I watched Greg's face change. The confident smile flickered for just a moment before returning. That was handled through our technical teams, Greg said smoothly. I focused on strategic oversight and client relations. Ellis wasn't satisfied. Could you be more specific about patch 3.4? We want to understand the decision-making process behind that particular fix. Greg fumbled, clearly having no idea what patch 3.4 even was. That was primarily an engineering implementation, he said. Mara worked closely with the technical teams on those details. I saw Mara's eyes widen slightly. She hadn't been involved in any technical decisions during the recovery. Ellis pressed further. And which vendor handled the patch QA verification? Greg looked to Mara for help. She stammered something about collaborative vendor relationships without naming any specific companies. There was a long pause. Then Ellis said, I see. Thank you for that clarification. The call ended shortly after. Greg emerged from the conference room looking puzzled, but not yet concerned. He had no idea how badly he'd just failed a basic competency test. By afternoon, the second shoe dropped. Ellis called back, this time requesting a formal audit of Orexon's project reporting processes. Specifically, he wanted to verify the accuracy of executive oversight claims before approving any contract renewals. Greg tried to downplay it as routine compliance procedures, but I could see panic creeping into his eyes. Mara looked genuinely scared. The audit request was copied to Orexon's board of directors, along with a note that future Fortis contracts would be contingent on satisfactory transparency verification. When $10.2 million contracts are at stake, boards pay attention. Within an hour, 3 executives were huddled in emergency meetings. Phone calls were made to legal departments and compliance officers. Greg spent the rest of the day frantically trying to reconstruct technical details he'd never bothered to learn. He cornered Marcus and demanded comprehensive briefings on the recovery process. But it was too late. When you claim credit for work you didn't do, you can't fake the detailed knowledge that comes from actually doing it. The system that had protected Greg through politics and connections was now turning against him. Because when clients start asking pointed questions, companies care more about facts than friendships. I cleaned out my desk quietly, knowing tomorrow would bring major changes for everyone involved. The Fortis audit began immediately. Professional investigators arrived to examine project records, interview team members, and verify the accuracy of Orexon's executive summaries. Within hours, the discrepancies were obvious. The timeline Greg had submitted to executives didn't match the actual recovery timeline. The vendor relationships he'd claimed to manage had been handled entirely by other people. The technical decisions he'd taken credit for had been made by engineers he'd barely spoken to. Marcus and Sarah were interviewed about the recovery process. They told the truth, that I had led the effort while Greg remained distant and uninformed. They had no reason to lie and every reason to protect their professional reputations by being honest. Greg was suspended pending the audit's completion. Mara was removed from her leadership position. Several other executives began quietly distancing themselves from the entire situation. The board called an emergency meeting to discuss potential damage to Orexon's relationship with Fortis Defense. Contracts worth millions of dollars were now in jeopardy because of falsified reporting. I received a call from the CEO's office asking if I'd be available for an urgent discussion about my future with the company. As I walked to that meeting, I realized Greg's plan had backfired completely. He'd tried to steal credit for saving the company, and instead had nearly destroyed it. I cleaned out my office systematically, packing 11 years of career memories into cardboard boxes. Awards, project photos, handwritten thank you notes from clients, all going into storage while corporate politics played out around me. The office was unusually quiet. People walked by without making eye contact, unsure whether I was a victim or a threat. The engineers who'd worked with me during the recovery looked sad but didn't know what to say. Micah appeared with a cup of coffee and red-rimmed eyes. "This isn't fair," he said quietly. "Everyone knows what really happened. Sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost," I told him. "But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing." He helped me carry boxes to my car, trying not to cry. "You saved all of us," he said. "The whole project would have failed without you." "And now everyone knows that," I replied. "That matters more than any job title." As I drove away from Orexon for the last time, I felt strangely peaceful. I'd lost a position, but I'd kept my integrity. In the long run, that trade-off would serve me well. My phone buzzed with a text from Ellis. "Impressed by your professionalism throughout this process. Would love to discuss opportunities when you're ready." Greg was terminated quietly, with the corporate euphemism, misalignment with client expectations, used in the official announcement. Mara was demoted to a non-leadership role. Several executives who'd supported the cover-up found their own positions restructured. The board offered me Greg's job, VP of Programs with full authority over technical project management. It was everything I'd worked toward for years. I declined politely but firmly. "I appreciate the offer," I told the CEO. "But I've already accepted another position, one where technical excellence is valued from the beginning, not just during crises." The CEO looked genuinely confused. "May I ask where you're going?" "A consulting firm that Fortis Defense recommended," I replied. "They specialize in defense contracts and have a reputation for ethical leadership." What I didn't mention was that my new firm had just been awarded 3 contracts that Fortis had pulled from Orexon's renewal pipeline. My first project would be implementing the same type of AI integration system I'd rescued at my former company. The CEO's face went pale as he realized the implications. "Dana, I hope there are no hard feelings about this situation." "No hard feelings," I assured him. "Just lessons learned about the difference between leadership and management." My new firm, Meridian Strategic Solutions, was everything Orexon wasn't. Small, focused, and built around technical expertise rather than corporate politics. The senior partners were all former military officers who valued competence over connections. My first day, the CEO walked me around the office personally. "Ellis Kessler spoke very highly of your work," he said. "We're excited to have someone with your crisis management skills." The team was lean but talented. Engineers who prioritized solutions over status, project managers who understood that good communication meant honest communication. Executives who'd actually done the technical work they now supervised. Within a week, I was leading the AI integration project that Fortis had moved from Orexon. The same type of system I'd rescued, but with proper resources and realistic timelines. The best part was the culture. When problems arose, people collaborated to solve them, instead of pointing fingers. When deadlines got tight, everyone rolled up their sleeves instead of looking for scapegoats. I thought about Micah, still at Orexon, and hoped he was learning that there were better ways to build a career than office politics and credit theft. My phone buzzed with an email from Marcus. "Heard about your new position. Any chance you're hiring experienced systems engineers?" A month later, I received an unexpected call from Micah. He was leaving Orexon for a software startup and wanted to update me on the aftermath of Greg's departure. "They're still trying to replace you," he said. "3 different project managers have tried to take over your old responsibilities. None of them lasted more than 2 weeks." I wasn't surprised. Managing complex technical projects required understanding the actual work, not just the paperwork. "The engineers keep asking when you're coming back," Micah continued. "Marcus especially. He says the new management doesn't understand interdependency protocols." "Marcus knows where to find me if he wants to make a change," I replied. Micah laughed. "He's already sent his resume, so have 2 of the other senior engineers." That evening, I reviewed the resumes. All talented people who'd been undervalued at Orexon, all capable of doing excellent work in the right environment. I forwarded them to my CEO with a note. "These are the engineers who actually delivered the $10.2 million project, worth considering if we're expanding the team." 2 weeks later, Marcus and Sarah both joined Meridian. Our technical capabilities doubled overnight, and our client satisfaction scores went through the roof. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just building something better. 6 months later, a confidential memo circulated through Orexon's leadership about strategic lessons from Project Icarus. I heard about it through industry contacts who found the timing interesting. The memo acknowledged that technical expertise should be valued alongside political skills. It recommended better documentation of individual contributions during crisis situations. It suggested that client relationships were built on competence, not just charm. Nowhere in the memo was my name mentioned, but every engineer who'd worked on that project knew exactly who had provided those strategic lessons. Orexon's relationship with Fortis Defense never fully recovered. The audit had revealed too many discrepancies, and trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. Several other defense contractors had quietly moved their business elsewhere. Meanwhile, Meridian's reputation grew. We became known for honest communication, technical excellence, and leadership that didn't hide behind titles. Our client retention rate was nearly perfect. I thought about Greg sometimes, wondering if he'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People who blame others for their failures rarely develop self-awareness. But I'd learned something important. Integrity isn't just about personal satisfaction. It's about building systems where good work gets recognized and honest people can thrive. I walked out of Meridian's headquarters into the evening air, feeling satisfied with another successful project delivery. My phone chimed with a text from Micah, who just landed a senior developer position at his startup. "Saw the news about Orexon losing another major contract," his message read. "They're still trying to figure out what went wrong. Meanwhile, you're building an empire of people who actually know how to do the work." I smiled and typed back, "Not an empire, just a place where competence matters more than politics." As I drove home, I reflected on everything that had happened since that terrible day when I'd learned about Greg's betrayal. The shock, the anger, the careful planning, and the eventual vindication. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone's career. I'd simply ensured that the truth was available to people who needed it. The consequences had followed naturally from there. All I did was save the project. Greg planned to fire me for it, so I made one call and let the truth finish the job. Sometimes the most powerful response to betrayal isn't revenge, it's just refusing to let dishonest people rewrite history. The truth has a way of surfacing eventually, especially when you've documented it carefully and shared it with people who value integrity. In the end, that was enough.